You can drop bombs, apply sanctions, freeze accounts, or isolate them diplomatically. But let me be blunt. No one, and I mean no one, has managed to break Iran. And perhaps no one ever will. The reason is not just military, is psychological, is historical, is rooted in something far deeper than steel and gunpowder. Iran is not just a country. It is an idea. A mindset forged through centuries of empire, collapse, resistance, and resurrection. And if you're trying to defeat a people like that, you're not fighting with tanks and aircraft carriers. You're fighting with ghosts, with faith, with a generational obsession with survival. Let's talk reality, not propaganda. Iran sits on one of the most volatile chessboards on earth, bordered by chaos, wedged between superpowers, and with a front row seat to nearly every global conflict of the last 40 years. And yet, it hasn't just survived, it has become one of the region's most influential players. Why? Because it plays the long game. Western powers often enter the arena with quick win mindsets and exit strategies. Iran, it digs in, builds roots, waits. Militarily, Iran doesn't need $1 trillion arsenal. What it has is something far more potent: strategic unpredictability and asymmetric warfare. You don't beat Iran in a fair fight because Iran doesn't play fair. It doesn't need to. They couldn't beat Sinis because it plays the long game. You don't beat Iran in a fair fight. It doesn't need to. While global powers flaunt fifth-generation jets, Iran builds swarms of low-cost drones, sleeper cells, missile networks, and proxy militias that can wreak havoc from Lebanon to Yemen. It's not a question of beating Iran in battle. The problem is, where do you even find Iran to strike? It's everywhere and nowhere. A shadow force spread across the region like wildfire. And when people talk about weakening Iran through sanctions, what they fail to grasp is this: you cannot cripple a nation that has already adapted to hardship. Iran has turned suffering into strength. Sanctions didn't starve it, they steeled it. Every embargo has been met with innovation, every restriction with resistance. Drones built in-house, missiles developed underground, oil traded through networks that even the most advanced surveillance struggles to track. But perhaps the most impenetrable weapon in Iran's arsenal isn't mechanical at all. It's spiritual, cultural. It's the national psyche, shaped by stories of martyrdom, divine justice, and historical grievance. The average Iranian does not see their country as just another state. They see it as a symbol of defiance, of holy resistance against global injustice. That's not nationalism. That's near religious conviction. And you can't bomb that into submission. Behind this iron resolve lies a sophisticated state machine, one that blends theology, politics, and intelligence in a way few countries do. Iran doesn't move like a Western state. It's not democratic in the liberal sense, nor is it purely autocratic. It's something else entirely, a regime with enough ideological grip to command obedience, but just enough populist flexibility to maintain control. It changes just enough to survive, never enough to surrender. And herein lies the mystery. You think you've got Iran figured out, and then it moves in a direction no analyst saw coming. It negotiates while preparing for war. It mourns its martyrs while smiling through back-channel diplomacy. It bore, one day it's isolated, the next it's striking deals with Russia and China. Predictability, that's a Western luxury. Iran doesn't afford it to its enemies. So if you're still wondering why no one can defeat Iran, it's not just about missiles or mullahs. It's about the mentality of a people who've stared down empires, watched cities burn, endured isolation, and yet here they stand, still proud, still defiant, delivered, still here. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. Underestimating Iran is not just foolish, it's fatal. One of the most compelling and overlooked reasons behind the rising emigration from Israel is the emergence of a silent, sustained exodus among the country's most educated, capable, and globally aware citizens. What used to be a rare and personal decision has turned into a collective movement fueled by fatigue, frustration, and a growing sense that the promise of Israel no longer matches the reality. The promise of Israel no longer matches the reality. This is not just about people chasing better job opportunities abroad or seeking adventure in foreign lands. It's about a deeper shift in how many Israelis, especially the youth, professionals, and liberal-minded individuals, perceive their future within the borders of their own country. The idea of leaving is no longer taboo. In many circles, it's now a topic of everyday conversation, a serious consideration for those who once believed they'd lived their entire lives in Israel. The trend is particularly striking among the country's elite thinkers and contributors, tech engineers, software developers, university lecturers, medical professionals, researchers, and even former army officers. These are not citizens disengaged from the national project. They are the very people who built the systems that once made Israel globally admired: the innovation economy, the robust military intelligence community, and the strong academic institutions. Yet many of these individuals are quietly slipping away, moving to cities like Berlin, Amsterdam, New York, Toronto, and Melbourne. There they find not only economic relief, but also ideological comfort. Places where civil liberties are stronger, political discourse is more stable, and the pressure of living in a militarized, polarized society is not a daily burden. What makes this exodus even more significant is the way it reflects a breakdown of the emotional connection between citizens and the state. For generations, the idea of Aliyah, Jewish immigration to Israel, was a moral mission. Israel was seen as the final refuge, the ancestral homeland, where Jews could live freely, safely, and proudly. But today, we are witnessing the reverse. People who were born in that very homeland are seeking refuge elsewhere. And not because of direct threats, but because of the gradual erosion of quality of life, public trust, and hope. They're not fleeing rockets. They're escaping something more subtle and far more enduring. A sense that the country no longer offers them the life they were promised. This migration is also powered by globalization and Israel's deep integration with the modern, interconnected world. Israeli citizens are highly educated, multilingual, and technologically advanced. Many hold dual citizenships through European ancestry or American family ties, which makes relocation a viable and relatively seamless process. They work for global companies, travel frequently, and maintain networks across continents. The world is open to them, and when they weigh the benefits, higher wages, lower living costs, less political turbulence, and a stronger sense of personal freedom, the decision to leave becomes less dramatic and more rational. It's not a rejection of Israel per se, it's a recalibration of their personal and professional priorities. Families too are playing a major role in this shift. Parents who once raised their children on Zionist ideals are now watching those same children grow up with different aspirations. Younger generations no longer see patriotism as rooted in geographical loyalty. They value freedom of speech, access to education, gender equality, and mental health. When they look at countries with stronger social safety nets, less violent political rhetoric, and more predictable futures, the contrast becomes too sharp to ignore. For many Israeli millennials and Gen Zers, staying feels like a compromise. Leaving feels like liberation. There is also a deeper psychological layer to this pattern. Israel is a country in constant conflict, both externally and internally. That reality wears people down. The threat of war is ever present. The political system feels unstable. The ideological divides are exhausting. Living in Israel means constantly navigating a mix of pride, fear, loyalty, and tension. It's emotionally draining, and the pressure builds quietly until it becomes unbearable. People start asking themselves the hard questions. Do I want to raise children in a country where they'll go to the army at 18? Do I want to grow old in a place where elections are held every year and the outcomes never seem to matter? Do I want to live where my values are increasingly at odds with national policy? And what often follows those questions is a quiet decision to go, not in anger, not in protest, but in resignation, a slow departure, a quiet packing of bags, a flight out of Ben Gurion Airport that symbolizes more than just a relocation. It's a conclusion, a belief that the life they imagine for themselves is no longer possible here. It's not about turning their backs on Israel. It's about turning towards something else, something they believe will offer peace, dignity, and opportunity. This is not a phenomenon driven by disloyalty or cynicism. It's driven by people who believed in Israel deeply, who gave it their youth, their service, their taxes, their dreams. But belief without reciprocity eventually fades. And that fading belief is now showing up in airports, embassies, visa offices, and foreign job markets. The most heartbreaking truth is that many of the people leaving still love Israel. They just don't believe it loves them back in the way they need. And in that disillusionment, in that quiet heartbreak, lies the real reason why so many are walking away. The political situation in Israel has evolved into a point of national distress that goes beyond partisanship, shaking the foundations of identity, belonging, and trust in government. What used to be heated debates in the Knesset or polarized election cycles has now spilled into the streets, homes, workplaces, and even the military ranks, turning everyday life into a constant confrontation with the direction the country is taking. At the center of this upheaval is a growing sense that the political system no longer represents the majority of the population, and worse, that it no longer functions in the interest of democracy, equality, or social cohesion. This has left many citizens not just disappointed, but alienated, feeling like outsiders in the very country they call home. For a people who have endured wars, terror attacks, and waves of global isolation, it's not the physical dangers that are pushing them away, it's the unraveling of the state from within. One of the major catalysts for this internal collapse has been the judicial overhaul crisis that sent hundreds of thousands of Israelis into the streets in protest. These reforms, spearheaded by the current right-wing government, aimed to weaken the power of the judiciary by allowing politicians to override Supreme Court decisions with a simple majority. To the public, this wasn't just another policy debate. It was a direct threat to the delicate balance of power that protects civil liberties in a country without a formal constitution. People from all walks of life, including judges, legal scholars, veterans, business leaders, and tech entrepreneurs, began sounding the alarm. warning that such moves could effectively dismantle Israel's democratic framework. The protests weren't just large, they were passionate, persistent, and remarkably diverse, reflecting a wide swath of Israeli society that had reached a breaking point. The crisis exposed a deeper and long-standing divide in Israeli politics. The growing dominance of ultra-Toto-Orthodox and ultra-nationalist parties in the government, often holding disproportionate power through coalition arrangements. These factions have increasingly pushed legislation that blurs the lines between religion and state, marginalizing secular Israelis and those who don't conform to a rigid traditionalist interpretation of Jewish life. Issues like who can marry whom, how Sabbath laws are enforced, how military service is assigned, or how women are treated in public life have become battlegrounds not of religious belief, but of identity and freedom. For many secular, liberal, or non-Orthodox Jews, the feeling is not just one of frustration. It's a sense that the country is being reshaped into something unfamiliar and unwelcoming. The very definition of what it means to be Israeli is being rewritten, and many no longer recognize themselves in that definition. This political polarization is also reflected in the behavior of elected officials, where the tone has become increasingly hostile, divisive, and populist. And the populist leaders no longer debate, they accuse. Political discourse is laced with threats, smear campaigns, and ideological purity tests. Anyone who disagrees is branded as a traitor, self-hating Jew, or an enemy of the state. These tactics, once reserved for the political fringes, have become normalized in national debate. They talked about China. Public trust in institutions has eroded rapidly, with polls showing that citizens no longer believe in the neutrality of the police, the objectivity of the courts, or the accountability of politicians. The feeling of being gaslit by one's own government is not just emotional, it's institutional. People don't feel like participants in a functioning democracy. They feel like spectators watching it erode in real time. This disillusionment is most acute among younger generations who expected to inherit a modern, pluralistic, and progressive country.